Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air. Our program is presented by members and friends of Aware, a local peace group. The name is an acronym that stands for Anti-War, Anti-Racism Effort. I'm Carl Estabrook. It's the 36th week of 2014. Aware was established after the attacks of 9/11-2001 by citizens of Champaign-Urbana. They realized that the U.S. government would use those crimes to justify its already long-standing attempts to exercise military control over the Middle East. Mideast gas and oil are needed by America's economic competitors in Europe and Asia, and control of them gives the U.S. an advantage over China, Germany, and other countries. Since World War II, the U.S. government has sought to dominate the world economy for the benefit of its rich, the 1%. It's not in the interest of the vast majority of Americans to kill people around the world for the profits of the 1%. But that's what the American government has done, up to and including President Obama's administration. In 1962, President Kennedy attacked South Vietnam to prevent the emergence in an Asian peasant society of a modernizing economy that was not subservient to American economic control. The U.S. killed 4 million people in Southeast Asia to ensure that result. In 1999, President Clinton attacked Southeast Europe for the same reason. Today, President Obama is arranging for people to be killed in Ukraine to ensure that the Eurasian economy does not pass out of U.S. control. In 1967, the civil rights leader Martin Luther King admitted with dismay that, quote, "the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today is my own government," close quote. Tragically, nothing has changed in the intervening years. American presidents have killed, wounded, and made homeless well over 20 million human beings in the last 50 years, mostly civilians. Not to spread peace and democracy, as our government contends, but to ensure U.S. economic control, as the rest of the world recognizes. This has made the U.S. government the most feared and hated in the world. After the 9/11 attacks, the U.S. government attempted to cover its military and economic control by declaring it was fighting a, quote, war on terror, close quote. But in the American lexicon, terror meant the armed resistance of peoples, particularly in the Middle East, to the U.S. control of their governments and society. Even the crimes of 9/11 were a counterattack, as the perpetrators themselves asserted. The people responsible for the 9/11 attacks said that they were done for three reasons: the oppression of the Palestinians, the murder of 500,000 Iraqi children by sanctions, and the American investment, the American military occupation of the holy places of Islam in Saudi Arabia. The war on terrorism was a vast projection by the United States. As Noam Chomsky said in one of the first books on the 9/11 attacks, quote, "Everybody's worried about stopping terrorism. Well, there's a really easy way. Stop participating in it," close quote. The United States has 1,000 military bases around the world, outside the confines of the U.S. Russia and China have none. The American Special Forces, essentially American death squads whose activities include torture, we call it enhanced interrogation, rendition, or kidnapping, which we call rendition, and killing, which we call disposition. The CIA runs a disposition matrix. The Special Forces, some 60,000 American soldiers in a private army, are active in 124 countries around the world, subject to the direction of the National Security Council, the President's National Security Council, not the Congress. In this situation, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today in the age of terrorism is, once again, the United States of America. Last year, President Obama told White House aides, quote, "Turns out I'm really good at killing people. Didn't know that was going to be a strong suit of mine," close quote. President Obama, on his own orders, has killed some 5,000 people with drones alone, including a drone strike yesterday in Africa. At least 200 children are among those 5,000. He has given permission to allies and subordinate governments, notably Israel and Ukraine, to carry out the murder of thousands more. Working for the American 1%, Obama backs Israel and Ukraine as they killed civilians in Donbass and Gaza. The child killers and the war promoters are doing the work of the defense lobby in the United States. War is good for business for many leading American corporations. You're watching Aware on the Air. Aware wants to stop the child killers in the White House and the Congress in their killing around the world on the behalf of the American 1%. We try to do that by exposing the real story of what's going on over against the false account that the U.S. media, a creation of big business, wants you to believe. We'll challenge that tonight with commentaries by Ron Zoke, Karen Aram, Karen Evans-Levy, Yaakov Ziso, and we'll begin with Ron Zoke on Wayward Warriors.
Yes, I want to mention something in the news just yesterday. Headline, U.S. military conducts operation against al-Shabaab in Somalia. So we're striking there again. The purpose of this military operation is still unknown to most people. The U.S. military said on Monday it conducted an operation against the Islamic militant group al-Shabaab in Somalia, the Pentagon said. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby provided few details about the nature of the operation, the results of which he said were being assessed. We are assessing the results of the operation and will provide additional information as and when appropriate, he said. So there we are conducting military operations in another country. Of course, we've been doing that for years, actually, but it seldom gets into the news this quickly. Meanwhile, the propaganda offensive against Russia continues to build. Some time ago, I may have mentioned this one. Waking up to the Russian threat, the head of NATO says Europe has misread Vladimir Putin for years and now must scramble to push back against the Kremlin's widening ambitions. So we've been warned there. And now we hear that NATO is weighing a rapid response force for Eastern Europe, as Ukrainian leaders warned on Monday of a great war with Russia. NATO leaders meeting in Wales this week were expected to endorse their most concrete response yet to increased Russian military intervention in Ukraine, establishing a rapid reaction force capable of deploying quickly to Eastern Europe. A new force of some 4,000 troops, capable of moving on 48 hours' notice, will be supported with logistics and equipment pre-positioned in Eastern European countries closer to Russia, with an upgraded schedule of military exercises and deployments that are intended to make NATO's commitment to collective defense more credible and enhance its deterrence. So, of course, when the other side does that, it's a horrible provocation indicating their warlike intentions. But when we do it, it's purely for defensive purposes, and indicates our commitment to peace. The Wayward Warrior is a comment, a label on all the people who leave their country and to go to fight on behalf of some other country. And sometimes they're paid for it. They're called mercenaries, but more often they're not. They are propagandized to the point of thinking this is a great patriotic, altruistic thing to do. U.S. security officials said they have identified nearly a dozen of the more than 100 Americans believed to have traveled from the United States to fight with radical Islamist groups in Syria. This has come up again and again in the news concerning England, the UK, is trying to identify those people who have gone to the Middle East and Africa and may be fighting on behalf of one of the supposed jihadist groups. They want to take away their passports and prevent them from re-entering England. So we're hearing a whole lot about that. It does raise a question of the ethics of that. This is an old idea, of course, going back probably centuries, but well-known examples being the Abraham Lincoln Brigade of Americans who went to fight on behalf of the Spanish Republicans during the Spanish Civil War of the late 1930s, and there have been many other instances of it. Well, the latest episode in this is from Ynet News, a reference to an IDF, that is the Israeli Defense Force, magnet for U.S. Olim. That's may not be a familiar term. What does Olim mean? O-L-I-M.
World.
Huh?
World. W-O-R-L-D. World.
A world. Oh, okay. These are,
as in Ribono Shel Olam, the Almighty of the world.
oh, I see. Okay. While the Knesset toils in its draft for all debate, some people can't wait to enlist. This summer sees a record-breaking number of 350 young Jews from North America who will immigrate to Israel to join the Israeli army. The first plain batch of these patriotic new recruits has already been nicknamed the Bakum Fight for Nefesh B'Nesh, with Bakum referring to the IDF Induction Center. So the plane, this says, should arrive in Israel in about 3 weeks and will host an unprecedented number of 400 immigrants, including 130 new IDF recruits. Comment, Yaakov?
No, Bakum is the base for recepting and basically dispatching the soldiers. Yeah. It's an abbreviation.
Yeah. Okay, so we're hearing a lot of noise about Americans and Brits who have possibly gone to the Middle East to fight on behalf of the insurgents, the jihadists, or whatever. And we're hearing nothing about this other group that's going to fight on behalf of the IDF and may get to kill some Palestinians. IDF app gives you a chance to defend Israel virtually. The IDF has a sophisticated website, an active Twitter account, and now it has its very own computer game. Nafayim, Wings in Hebrew, is a first-person shooting game that lets players take control of an Israeli Air Force plane or helicopter and defend Israel by eliminating bad guys, including enemy aircraft and land-based missile launches. So this is apparently becoming quite popular in Israel. The game should be familiar, at least in outline, to any student of shooter games. You move the plane along the screen by guiding it with your finger, and you have a choice of a Israeli version of the C-130 Hercules, or a Sikorsky Black Hawk helicopter, or an F-16. And when you come across an enemy plane or a nest of rocket-firing terrorists, you use one of the two shooting buttons on either side of the screen to release missiles and bombs, depending on the aircraft that you're flying. Of course, you're getting shot at as well, so you have to be adept at moving quickly, shooting, and evading incoming all at the same time. So the game is in Hebrew, although the play is straightforward and should be easy to pick up without even needing to consult the instructions. Another headline in the Times of Israel: half of Israel teens agree it's good to die for the country. A poll published on Channel 2 by Channel 2 on Sunday found that among Israeli teenagers aged 17 and 18 facing the IDF draft, 49% agree that it's good to die for their country. Asked whether they agree with the statement, "Never mind, it is good to die for our country," said to be the last words of pre-state Zionist war hero Joseph Trumpeldor before his death defending the settlement of Tel Hai in 1920. 23% responded that they strongly agree, while 26% say that they mostly agree. 27% partially agreed, 13% responded that they don't really agree with the motto, and 9% said they disagreed. 2% didn't know what to think about it. So another step toward the Middle Eastern conflagration that will apparently develop into, or may develop into, the demise of one antagonist or the other. Meanwhile, the Anti-Defamation League has announced a program of awarding all expenses paid 1-week tours of Israel to all student government leaders, the officers in various student governments of colleges and universities around the USA. As the school year starts, the Anti-Defamation League's Director of Campus Initiatives, Naomi Meyer, has sent personalized invitations to elected members of student government, inviting them to participate in an all-expenses-paid trip to Israel. So they will get tours, do a lot of sightseeing, and inevitably a certain amount of indoctrination about the Israeli point of view on this. Meanwhile, yesterday we hear that Israel plans to expropriate 400 hectares of the West Bank. It's a little over under 1,000 acres. Israel denounced Sunday it will expropriate 400 hectares, 988 acres of Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank, angering the Palestinians and alarming Israeli peace campaigners. The move to seize the land in the Bethlehem area in the south of the territory is the biggest of its kind in 3 decades, Peace Now said. So on the position, on the instructions of the political echelon, the settlement, Givat settlement, is declared state land, said the Army Department, charged with administering civil affairs in the occupied territory, laying down a 45-day period for any appeal. The IDF said the move stemmed from political decisions taken after the June killing of 3 Israeli teenagers snatched from a roadside in the same area, known to Israelis as the Gush Ezan settlement block. So I hope my colleagues here will comment on this. It's rare you see such defiance, and in fact it has been opposed, this move, by at least 2 Israeli cabinet members, saying that we're in enough trouble now with world opinion that we certainly don't need this, but apparently it's going ahead anyway. So with that, I'll stop.
Thank you, Ron. We're postponing comments to the end after all the panelists have had a chance to say something. You're watching Aware on the Air, and we will turn now to Karen Aram, Washington Plans for World War.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, this is, excuse me, taken from the World Socialist website, of whom I've been quoting the past 3 weeks. This was published August 6th, and it's written by Patrick Martin. And I've been, it appears I'm using the same source each week. I apologize, I'm not. It tends to be supported by many other articles that I have read, and but they seem to be rather prescient with their information. A remarkable document that was published July 31st on the U.S. military planning calls for the Pentagon to prepare to wage as many as half a dozen wars at the same time, including wars in which the antagonist possesses nuclear weapons. Now, this document, titled Ensuring a Strong Defense for the Future, was drafted by the National Defense Panel, a group of former top civilian and military officials, commissioned by Congress to provide a critical review of the official Pentagon planning document released early this year in the Quadrennial Defense Review. The National Defense Panel is a group, and it's very bipartisan. I mean, it contains, I won't go through the list of names, but they're from both Democrats and Republicans. And the auspices of a federally funded agency devoted to the study of war, it's whose name, with impeccable Orwellian logic, is the U.S. Institute of Peace. The document warns of the dangers facing the United States, and they list in first place the growing power of China and Russia, followed by North Korea, Iran, Iraq, Syria, the Middle East as a whole, and then Africa. China and Russia have thus been moved to the top of the list of potential targets for U.S. military action, ahead of the three countries singled out by George W. Bush in his notorious Axis of Evil speech back in 2009. You know, it's the usual suspects. The United States could plausibly, this is in the current threat environment, they claim that the United States could plausibly be called upon to deter or fight in several regions in overlapping time frames. On the Korean Peninsula, in the East or South China Sea, in the Middle East, South Asia, and quite possibly in Europe. The U.S. also faces the prospect of having to face nuclear-armed adversaries, so they say. So the main point is that they want to, the U.S. military must be able to sustain global counterterrorism. That's the usual spiel that they give. Now this list suggests that the United States be prepared to fight not 2, as in the past, but 5 or 6 major wars simultaneously. This is nothing less than the demand that U.S. is preparing, is to begin preparing to wage a world war which would threaten the extinction of humanity. The elevation of China and Russia as likely targets of U.S. military action has the most ominous implications, since these two countries have the second and third largest nuclear arsenals on the planet, following that of the U.S. itself. The report backs the Obama administration's posture of rebalancing U.S. military forces to confront China, describing this strategic initiative as an effort to reassert the primacy of the Asia-Pacific region among U.S. security interests. Here's where it gets really scary. The proliferation of unmanned and increasingly autonomous systems in the Asia-Pacific, as well as the Middle East, for example, will have a detrimental impact on the ability to maintain stability during a crisis or to manage escalation if conflict erupts. Before policymakers and military commanders have adequate time to react. So to put it plainly, a major war can erupt through the interaction of drone weapons and automated response systems on both sides, even without any human intervention. The report does not openly question the all-volunteer military force, but it focuses on its rising cost and calls for sensible and cost-effective pay and benefits reforms to make it more affordable. It means sooner rather than later that the U.S. must move towards some form of conscription, even beyond the current economic draft. The authors repeatedly complain of a limitation on U.S. military spending because of the burden of domestic social programs. They declare that America must get her fiscal house in order while simultaneously funding robust military spending. Aggressive health care containment, cost containment should certainly be pursued both within the department and more broadly, meaning for the military and their families, and more broadly across all government programs. So to reiterate again, this is a bipartisan report. Democrats as well as Republicans, liberals and conservatives endorsed its demand that the social programs upon which people depend should be slashed to ensure that trillions are available for the insatiable maw of the American military machine. So.
Charming.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Karen. You're watching We're on the Air, where we're indulging in
Doom.
dark thoughts, I'm afraid, yes.
Yes.
We'll press on with Yakov Ziso. Comments from Yakov.
I've got 2 comments, 2 kind of strategic comments, one to you and one to Ron. But first I wanted to say something about Ron's mention of the games. And because I was involved in a Facebook conversation about these very issues as in a research of the education system in Israel, of the very curriculum, the syllabi, the textbooks, as far as how are the soldiers for the IDF prepared in grammar school and high school towards their service. And I also did the same thing for the Palestinian schools and system there, in the West Bank and in Gaza. And the interesting thing is that pretty much they kind of echo on each other. And I don't know of any video games in the Palestinian system, but it's pretty much the same thing that children are being raised in elementary school in Israel. They are even taught something that's called moledet, which is the Hebrew word for patria, for motherland. So they learned about the map of Israel as a motherland. And the similar thing in the Palestinian systems is how the elementary teachers, elementary school, are essentially talking about the honor and the obligation of being a shaheed, of basically committing suicide in favor of the cause of the Palestinians and of Islam. So, I mean, I think that that kind of is a segues to my question to you, Ron. When you bring those things, I think I also asked you in the past, is your intent to kind of be a watchdog for this? Or do you have also some ideas of how we can move away from this horrible path in our realities?
Make people aware of it. I don't think most Americans are aware of this. And I think these are bad developments, kind of horrifying in some respects. It's increasing the conflict and trying to whip up indignation about the atrocities committed by the other side and so on. And I deplore that and I would like to do what I can to overcome it on both sides.
So basically the watchdog, I mean, this is not only
yes.
you, I'm just want to clarify this.
Yes.
Okay, so Carl, this is a question that I have of aware the programs. I was thinking, in general lines, we are essentially observing very closely the atrocities over the globe that are initiated and generated by the United States, and we pay taxes for it. We call it the greatest democracy known to terror kind.
That's good.
So what we say, if this is step one, step two is we say, and here is Israel/Zionism. And Zionism makes Israel and the United States armament complex, great bedfellows. Yeah. Because, hey, one hand washes the other. So my question is, why don't we do the same? I mean, there's another bedfellow here, which are the Palestinians, are the Muslim countries, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, especially Qatar, as far as the Hamas and Gaza. So we don't go in that way. And I was thinking, for example, Brazil has an enormous amount of armament purchased from Israel, or purchased from the United States via Israel. But they don't go, and they don't have an ISIS army that goes and slaughters people all over the region. The Islam armies, the ISIS, for example, they do. So there is something in Islam that makes these people very, I think, receptive to the violence that they commit. And it didn't go that way. So why didn't we? What gives?
Well, I don't.
That bed is getting pretty crowded. I mean, can't we deal with one insoluble issue at a time?
Well, I'm sorry, say it again, Ron.
I think it's nothing short of propaganda, Yaakov, to say that the what's the problem in the Middle East, or the problem with warfare around the globe right now is Islam versus the West. I think it's also false.
I didn't say that. That's not what I said, Carl. I said we only go to Zionism and United States. We go that way. We don't go to United States and Islam.
I don't think I'm not sure what you mean by going to that, but in giving an account of what the United States is doing around the world and as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, the connection with Israel I've insisted on this program, should be regarded as part of the American policy for the Middle East for some time. It's not always been the case that the U.S. has patronized Israel as a client state as part of its offensive structure in the Middle East. It was particularly after '67, after the '67 war, that Israel was sort of enlisted in the American, as the American guard dog in the Middle East, as the Nixon administration said, in order to pursue American goals. And those American goals are primarily the control of energy resources in the region. Now, we've heard a lot of other things from other people about why the U.S. supports Israel, and why, indeed, in some people's fantasies, American interests are being betrayed to Israeli interests because of Israel's purchase, literally and figuratively, of the American Congress. I think that's quite false. I think that if Israel were to stop serving the American imperialist purposes in the Middle East, the U.S. would sell Israel down the river just as fast as it has others. In fact, I think there's some worry in Tel Aviv about that right now. I think there are people in Tel Aviv, and not far from the top of the Israeli government, who are very, very worried about the U.S. negotiations with Iran and about the circumstances that are driving the U.S. and Iran to take essentially joint military actions against the caliphate. They're worried in Tel Aviv that the U.S. may not exactly change sides, but at least shift its support away from Israel as its major client in the region to other clients. In fact, it already has other clients in the region. The American control of the Middle East rests upon an effective alliance between Saudi Arabia and Israel. Islam is the propagandistic cover, but the real interest is the economic and military cooperation between the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and Israel. So the idea that we're somehow just talking about Zionism and we should be talking about Islam, I think is already to acquiesce into the propagandistic account the U.S. gives of what it does. Its reasons are much more straightforward.
And in my opinion, number one, everything that you just said about why and what is happening between the United States and Israel, there is no argument about it. But what I'm saying is that there's some kind of a compelling argument that, in my opinion, is something that is paid by billions of dollars by Qatar and other people who are basically boosting the propaganda against Israel. And it makes us look, when we are going to, if we are going to now say anything about, read the Quran, read the charter of Hamas. That's going to say, oh, this is the Israeli Hezbollah, this is just, that's propaganda, etc. We won't go that way. And if someone's going to investigate into the, the very Quran or into the very Islam, and in what I propose to look at, the very reasons that the people of the Islam forces, those who are now slaughtering all over the Middle East, there is something that compels them to do it in Islam. That's what I'm saying, that this is something that I propose. You're saying no, but did we investigate those things? We didn't. This group,
we have. Many times we've spoken out about our support, U.S. government support for ISIS. We have talked about U.S. government support for a Muslim government in Indonesia to kill people when it suited our needs. I mean, we have all talked about that, maybe on programs in the past that you didn't see.
But Karen,
we have talked about that.
That's fine. I'm not talking now about
about Islam, about the ideology of Islam, eh?
Exactly. I'm talking about the very core of Islam. What makes a person who is an Islamist, a zealot, or an Orthodox Islamist, what makes that person commit the atrocities that they commit in the name of Islam? Why don't we investigate that?
Christians use the name of
It's not the same like Christians. That's what I'm saying. If you investigate, you say that without knowing. You don't. You didn't read the Islam to say those things.
Okay.
I don't want to read history. I want to read the Islam. I want to read the Hamas charter and see what do they say.
They specifically.
I can be so specific
renounced that charter, right?
Sorry?
Yaakov? Yeah. they specifically, Hamas has specifically renounced that charter, right?
No, if you go now to Gaza, if you go to Gaza, you speak with people of Gaza,
Yeah.
they say, we don't want Hamas, they don't want the charter. The people who now speak for Hamas, they didn't renounce it. They made many comments, they renounced this, they didn't renounce this. It's kind of
I think
every day something is changing, but that's fine, that's politics. I'm just not talking about them, I'm talking about us here. I feel like I'm basically like a puppet in the hands of the Qatar propaganda.
Yeah.
Very intelligent propaganda that makes research people on the high level of yourself and the people here, we don't observe that we're being manipulated by that propaganda.
That would be the tail wagging the dog in a new fashion, I think. Go ahead, Karen.
So I actually have a question about Zionism in particular. I have never equated Judaism and Zionism. I have always equated Zionism as a political,
Right.
military type thing that uses religion
Right.
as a reason to bring people toward it. And I also see that happen, I mean, I've seen it in Christianity, where they've used the religion in order to get people to go on rampages against,
Crusades.
crusades or missionary missions
Right.
to, change the whole world and to go out. But it's always a way of manipulating religion and the people who believe in order to get them to follow a political, military
Agenda.
advancement, right?
Yeah.
And I have no doubt that Islam also is being used in many ways the same way. But my question is Zionism not what I think it is? Is it not? Is it completely separate from Judaism and just using it?
I mean, there are many people on this panel that can answer the question because they've researched Zionism. And if you're addressing the question to me,
Yeah.
it's not only one answer fits all. The
Okay.
point that I'm saying here is the whole way of life having to do with Zionism that emanates from religion, which is what you're
Right,
talking
right,
about.
right.
And I'm saying there is something comparable to that way of life in Islam, which we did never really address, apple to apple, and we kind of are afraid to do that because it's supposedly not politically correct in the left to do that.
Well, no, because it's wrong. I mean, it isn't an accurate description of the situation. You can't say that the crimes that Israel has just committed in Gaza are a result of Judaism as a religion. You can't say that the crimes that the caliphate is committing in Syria and Iraq right now are a result of Islam.
Or the crimes that the U.S. is
Ron, you disagree
committing
with that. You
just
think that
because of
you
Christianity.
can't say that in both cases.
No. The great majority of Muslims in the world are opposed to the violence and warlikeness of the warring groups in the Middle East, the jihadists.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's very true.
And I don't know the figures, but we know that there are a great many, I can't say whether a majority or not, of Jews around the world are opposed to the violence that Israel is committing against
Yes.
Gaza.
So we have to keep clear
Politics.
that Judaism, Zionism, Israeli nationalism, and then the ideology of the ruling group currently in Israel are all different things. There's some overlap, of course, but they're distinct.
And to be absolutely symmetrical, so to speak, Karen, you would have to speak about Judaists, that is, people who believe in the religion of Judaism, because the ambiguity grows here when we use the term Jew to refer to someone who is so defined by descent. Depends upon
Right.
the parents were.
Culture.
That's not necessarily, to be a Muslim is to be a participant in the religion of Islam. To be a Judaist is to be a participant in the religion of Judaism. And those are the parallel terms. And the fact that we don't use the term Judaist very much outside of academic context points up some of the difficulties, some of the ambiguities that occur when we start talking about Islam as a religion that has political consequences.
Okay, bottom line, if I was expecting you to tell me, Yaakov, just bring for the next week whatever you are saying is the Hamas chart or something. Let's see what you are talking about. But I'm saying, I'm just fast forwarding to such a next week. If I were to bring it, I'm postulating today that the comments I'm going to hear from here are going to be, this is Israeli Hasbara, this is not, and blah, blah.
Yes, because
Right.
it is, right.
You see?
Yeah.
That's,
I-
that's
it's
exactly
true.
my point.
But the only people who are talking, the
That's
only people who are
fine.
talking
I'm
about.
going to drink to it now.
What documents are you,
The charter of the Hamas, the very
Hamas
raison
charter.
d'etre of Hamas.
Okay. Can
And
I
the
ask
only
you a
people who are
question?
talking about the charter of Hamas
Or the Islam. I can bring, the very Quran
Is
to
Israel.
bring things,
I can
bring the Quran.
I'll bring my English version of the Quran as
And
well.
then what? We're going to compare translations?
Oh, wonderful.
Do-
That'll be fun.
Why
We're a
don't you bring?
political group. We're a
you
political
don't-
group,
I
not
won't bring
religious.
anything, Karen. I won't bring it. You bring whatever you want to bring, but let's discuss now the Islam and how the Islam views all other people
I
in the
don't
world.
want to discuss religion.
but no, wait.
Good for
on
you,
the
but,
show.
But it's a
some
reasonable
people out
question,
there
Karen.
in Iraq now are slaughtering other people. They're cutting their throats with the belief that that's what Islam calls them to do. You don't want to read it.
We set them up.
Sure.
We established them.
Sure, so you talk about yourself and yourself and yourself. And they're slaughtering them.
I'm not talking about myself. I'm talking about my government and
Excuse
the
my
taxes
French.
that we support. That wasn't French.
I said a few things now in my mind in French.
You're watching and we're on the air, more or less in English. Karen Evans Levy,
Karen
did you
Evans,
have
yes.
did you have
She does
another
have-
topic you wanted to turn
I
to?
have two things that I want to mention. One has 6 parts to it, but the first one that I want to mention that has only one part to it, but many fingers, is that yesterday was Labor Day, and we celebrated that our laborers, and a lot of us had a day off, but there were many laborers that still had to work. I just want to point that out. But the thing that I really wanted to point out about that is that there are labor unions that are speaking up more and more, that where there are immigrant workers working legally in the United States that are considering unionizing, even though they're not U.S. citizens. They are legal to work here. They would like to unionize, and so then they are threatened by their companies that they will be deported, and they are often deported. So the U.S. citizens unions are supporting these people and saying, stop deporting these people because they're going to unionize. That's not good for the workers. It's not good for the United States. And it's not good for the economy. The economy is actually boosted by all of its workers being treated fairly and given a living wage, and that includes the immigrant workers. And so that is, look for stories. It's happened since 2007. I mean, long before then, but also more recently, 2007, 2014, some things just happened. So in favor of Labor Day, I just wanted to mention those stories. The second thing I wanted to mention is the social justice film series that happens every year with different films. And this year, it's going to be at the Channing Murray Foundation, which it often is. And there are going to be 5 different film nights. Most of them are on the first Monday of the month, but there's a special one too. So the social justice film screening, they're all free films. They start at 6:30, most of them, and then there's usually like a little potluck and get to know each other, and then a discussion after the film. The first film that is going to happen is Monday, September 8th at 6:30 at Channing Murray Foundation, and I'll mention where that is. 1209 West Oregon Street in Urbana, Illinois. And it's basically the Unitarian Universalist Foundation on campus. They have a lot of social justice stuff going on there. The first film is September 8th, 5 broken cameras, and it's about a Palestinian villager who has a camera who starts recording parts of his life. And so that's very interesting. I've seen it before. He has a camera and then it gets broken, and then so part of his life is told, and then he gets another camera. And so anyway, it's a very good film. The October 6th, which is also a Monday, is Prison Justice triple feature. There's 3 short films, a 10-minute film, a 20-minute film, and a 26-minute film. And one of them is actually a local film created by the Education Justice Project here in, it's actually the Danville prison, where they're giving college credit for classes that they teach out at the prison, and it's a very good project. I've not seen the film, but it should be very good. There'll also be discussion after all these things. The second film for that night is Solitary Confinement, Torture in Your Backyard, which is a 20-minute film. And then there's a Lens and Pens Art in an Unexpected Place, and it's about art in prisons, and that's 26 minutes. That's October 6th. October 12th is a different day because it's Columbus Day, and it's actually on Sunday. And that film will actually be at 2 o'clock instead of the normal 6:30. So on Columbus Day, they will have a film on Latino immigrants in a Midwestern town, and the Midwestern town happens to be Bloomington, Indiana, which is very close and similar to Champaign-Urbana in many ways. That will be very interesting. Okay, then the other film will be November 3rd, which is also a Monday, and the film is The Square, and you can read up on that one. Monday, December 1st at 6:30 p.m. will be How to Survive a Plague, and it's in honor of the World AIDS Day. And so there will those 5 films and great discussion, and again, all the films are free, and they're very worth attending, but they're also very worth supporting because it does cost them money to bring these films to us. They are free, but support them by your presence, your discussion, but also by monetary would not be beyond the reach of many of us. So
I have to comment
Thank you.
about this, Karen.
Okay.
Number one, Austin McCann, who's
Yeah.
the manager of the art theater here, he brought, I think only one of them, but all of these movies except one, he brought them to the art theater
Yes.
very early
Yeah.
after they were released, and we had the opportunity to see them, many of them, as they came up.
Yeah.
Now, the number 2 is about the 5 broken cameras.
Yeah.
So that Palestinian who filmed his life, as you
Yeah.
said, had a camera that was broken in one of the protests, and then he got 4 more cameras. The 4 more cameras, he got one after the other from an Israeli activist
Did
who
he really?
collaborated with him.
Way cool.
And also the movie was made possible according to the support from Israeli peace activists
Yay.
that essentially, they gave money for the lightings and all that things that were needed for making the movie.
Very, very good. Nice.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, and like the administration, we're going to pivot to Asia, right?
Yes, I'll try to be brief. This is in reference to some of what Ron was talking about, the land grabbing that the Israelis just did. So blatant, so much. This is not as horrible, but it's happening in Thailand. Right now, the Isan people are being kicked off their land. They've been given 30 days notice, and they have to leave. Now, the Isan people are in the northeast. That is the most impoverished section of the country, and they were kicked off back in the 70s. You have to understand, some of the poor people throughout Southeast Asia, in the Philippines it's happened, they don't have contracts, they don't have deeds to their land. They're just living there because their parents and their grandparents and their ancestors occupied land that generally nobody else wanted. Now, this happened in the 70s when they were kicked off because the argument of the Forest Department at that time was that we have to maintain our pristine forest. Once the people were relocated, they then cut down all the forest and planted eucalyptus trees, which are planted and sold for profit. Okay, so now they're being kicked out of their forest land again, and this is just typical of the military junta who's in power. Pakistan, I think, Ron, you also mentioned Pakistan a couple of weeks ago, what was happening there. Most of it's internal. I'm not really that familiar with it. What I do know, the upheavals there certainly are not helped by IMF program of austerity, which the poor there are suffering and are quite dissatisfied with, along with the U.S. drone attacks that have been going on and on, as we well know, into North Pakistan. And to point out, it is a very sensitive area up in the north area near Kashmir, because you've got India and you've got Pakistan, and they are armed to the teeth, and they are both military powers. So that is a very serious issue. Indonesia, good news on Indonesia. The court did rule that Widodo Johoho, I'm sorry I don't say his name properly, He did win the election over Prabowo, who was the military person that was known as our man in the U.S. So we'll see what happens. I'm not real excited. He has a lot cut out for him to tackle, a lot of problems, even though Indonesia is rising and very pleasing to business interest and Wall Street. Nonetheless, they have a very large gap between the rich and the poor. And we know what happened in Egypt. It's very easy for a new government and someone who doesn't possess a lot of power, especially military power, to appear not to be efficient, and then that gives rise to coups and whatnot for military takeovers. So I am a little concerned about Indonesia. Hong Kong, you're seeing it on the news now. It's hit CNN. Hong Kong has been having a lot of protest out in the streets against what the Beijing government is going to, what Beijing wants to do is to have first choice over the leaders of Hong Kong. And obviously they want to make sure that they have people who are very positive towards Beijing. So the people, a lot of them are the young people, the students who, and the workers are protesting because millions have been out there protesting. Now they've been having a protest annually every year since the handover in '96 because they kind of liked the British colonists who, when I asked someone recently, I haven't looked into it, I said, wait a minute, what do they have under British colonial law? It was probably some white guy from the UK that was handpicked for them or appointed for them. So, but now as people have more freedom, there is a tendency to continue to want more freedom. So I'm not, I can't criticize the people for the unrest against Beijing, but I think we know what's going to happen, and everybody does know what's going to happen. And I think the U.S. loves this because China's unlikely to give in to so much, we call it shame, being projected on them. So I just hope we don't have another Tiananmen, which could possibly result. And I'm kind of amused because I'm thinking, actually, they just want what we would like. You know, we have the Democrat Party handpicking their people. We have the Republican Party handpicking their people, and then we think that we're choosing we think we're a democracy and making a choice, but actually, when it's being handpicked by your leaders, it's not real choice. So I do understand Hong Kong people wanting that choice. But I think that the way they're going about it, it could spell disaster in the near future. I don't know. We'll see what happens. China, of course, has claimed that there are foreign interests behind it. And we all know what my speculation would be on that, who those foreign interests might be. I have no doubt they're there, but so, you know, there's no proof. So I rest my case.
Thank you, Karen. We have coming up this week NATO meetings in Wales.
Yes.
And the main reason to go to Wales is to get away from other places, and I'm sure that's why NATO is meeting there.
Yes. Serious issue.
These are the same meetings that were held in Chicago, where we heard Hillary Clinton's people say that, well, we had to hang on in Afghanistan because the real reason we were killing people in Afghanistan was to protect the women. That was the major account we were getting of what the U.S. was doing in Afghanistan at the last NATO meetings in Chicago. Well, these ones coming up in Wales may be even more significant. There was a line in the Nation magazine this last week from Stephen Cohen, former professor of Russian studies at Princeton, who said, and I quote, "The seemingly unthinkable is becoming imaginable, an actual war between NATO, led by the United States, and post-Soviet Russia." Now, Cohen is not an alarmist. He is an academic and regularly comments on Russian affairs. But the fact that such a statement can be made without much fanfare seems to me to suggest something that's going on that we're not perhaps paying enough attention to. What we're hearing in the press is that Vladimir Putin is the new Hitler. and that sometime we've got to stop Hitler the same way we did last time, you know. That's a worthwhile reflection when we realize that this week is the 75th anniversary of the outbreak of the Second World War. And the Second World War, from the need to stop Hitler to the necessity of dropping atomic bombs on Asians, is probably the fundamental mythology of American politics. It's where we get all our notions of what we should do. We don't want another Munich, where we give in to dictators and so forth. And we're hearing all of that in regard to Putin and Russia right now. Complete misrepresentation. I can't think of a story in the American press regarding foreign policy that's been worse, that's been presented worse than the story of what's going on in Ukraine and the literally thousands of dead people there that the U.S. is responsible for. I recommend a book for people who want to attack the American mythology of the Second World War, Human Smoke, The Beginnings of World War II, The End of Civilization. It's a 2008 book by Nicholson Baker about World War II. The book questions the commonly held belief that the Allies wanted to avoid the war at all costs, but were forced into action by Hitler's unrelenting crusade. It consists largely of official government transcripts, newspaper articles, and other documents from the time, with Baker interjecting commentary only occasionally. It's quite remarkable to read these newspaper accounts from the 1930s and 40s. Baker cites documents that suggest the leaders of the United States and the United Kingdom were provoking Germany and Japan into war, and the leaders of those two nations had ulterior motives for participating. Baker dedicates the book to American and British pacifists of the time, who in the book's epilogue he states had it right all along, quote, "They failed, but they were right." You've been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, in the 36th week of 2014. Thanks to Jason Liggett for direction and production. Thanks to him also, this program and others like it will be available on YouTube, and you can see our Facebook page for Aware for these earlier programs and comments. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about, but Americans don't. Manning, Assange, Snowden, and the rest, who are being persecuted by the Obama administration. Now, this is Carl Estabrook for Karen Aram, Ron Zoke, Karen Evans-Levy, Stuart Levy, David Johnson, David Green, Yakov Ziso, and other members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.